Welcome to the Productivity Show podcast, where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tam Pham. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan, the COO of Asian Efficiency. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm great. What's going on with you?
Well, we're going to be talking about Evernote today. I know you and I are big Evernote users, or maybe hint, hint, have been in the past, but it's been a while since we've talked about Evernote. So I thought it would be fun for us to talk about this because you actually mentioned something very recently to me that as you were kind of like going through Twitter, you saw that the CEO of Evernote made a recap. And one of the things that he said that stood out to you was he said, quote, your subscription propelled Evernote to its highest annual revenues in history, end quote. And when you read that, you said, wait, what? Really? And when I saw it, I thought, wow, like I did not see that coming. So I thought, let's record a podcast about this and talk about why this happened and what we think about it.
Yeah, it's like one of those moments, you're kind of like scrolling through Twitter, and I know that every year the CEO writes a kind of like State of the Union letter about the past year, and I just somebody had highlighted that quote, and you're scrolling through Twitter, and all of a sudden it was like a record scratch moment, like what really, and it made me stop. And so really interested to talk about Evernote, what's going on. Actually, in 2021, they did quite a bit with as far as new features and stuff going on. Evernote was very stagnant for a very long time. So really thankful that that's starting to unplug. So excited to get into all of it today.
Yeah. So whether you're an Evernote user, but maybe you haven't really looked into the features that have recently come out, I think you're going to enjoy today's episode as we cover some of them. You might be a former Evernote user, and you might be curious to hear what's happening with the app, what's going on these days, and maybe you're considering coming back. And I know many of you are also considering coming back to Evernote, and this episode will kind of give you a glimpse of what's going on. And some of you just want to kind of check out the latest and greatest when it comes to productivity apps. And either way, I think you're going to be learning something here today. And everything that we will mention today will be found in the show notes. So you can go to theproductivityshow.com/392. And always, we like to kick it off with our top three favorite resources. And Brooks, in 90 seconds or less, can you share with the audience what we have here?
Yeah, so my first resource is a document scanner. It's called the ScanSnap IX1600. Now, talking about Evernote, the Evernote app does a great job of scanning one-off things, but if you got a lot of paper to scan, you're probably going to want a proper document scanner. I don't have the IX1600. I have the IX1500, which is the slightly older model, but the IX1600 is kind of like the top of the line. It's for Windows, it's for Mac, and you can scan to many different locations, including Evernote. So that's number one. Number two is a Rocketbook, which is a smart reusable notebook that lets you write with your handwritten notes and then send your notes to Evernote, Dropbox, wherever you want. We actually have an article on the Rocket Note on the AE blog, so we'll include a link to that as well. And then the third is an app called Rise Science. So what it does is it will let you measure sleep debt, get insights when you feel the most energetic based on your circadian rhythm. And it's just like one of this new crop of sleep apps that will help you improve that important part of the T framework. So those are our top three resources. We always like to do a little teaser to the next week's episode. So next week, we're going to be talking about, actually on the theme of Rise Science, we're going to be talking about some of our favorite wellness apps. So whatever wellness means to you or means to us, we're going to be diving into some apps that can really help with your wellness. All right, but we are not talking about wellness today. We are talking about Evernote. And we mentioned the CEO's letter. We'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes. But I just thought it would be nice to start overall talking about Evernote. And I'm just curious, Tam, like I know you've used Evernote for quite a while, as have I. What are your thoughts and opinions just generally on the state of where things are right now?
Before we started recording, I opened up my Evernote accounts just to kind of check my like historical data and when I started using it. And then I noticed that I signed up in April of 2010. So it's been almost 12 years now. That shows you how long this app has been around. and it was, I believe, out of beta in about 2008. So this app has been around for a while, and I like to call it Mr. Reliable. It's been around for so long that you can kind of count on the app. Now it's had its glory days and it had its darker days. And if I kind of had to summarize where Evernote stands right now, the last few years it's been kind of, like you mentioned, kind of stagnant. But I think last year it really made a big comeback. And going into 2022 now, I think it's going to be better than ever. And some of the newest features that they've implemented over the last year are things that I enjoy very much. And so, as we're going to start diving deeper into it, I'm going to share some of the things that I use it for now, which have slightly changed as well. So, I think the thing that is always tricky with software that has been around for so long is that it can easily turn into bloatware. And bloatware simply means software that has like 1,000 features, but most people don't actually use all of the features. And it just has way too many features for what it actually needs to do. So I find that Evernote kind of has done a good job of avoiding that. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see that things seem to be stabilizing and growing. I've also used Evernote for a long time. I actually did start using it in 2008, so I was definitely one of the early users. But it's funny, we're recording this in 2022, but if you think back just a few years ago, 2018, the big chunks of the company were being laid off. Pretty much the entire executive team all left, including the CEO. There's quite a big user defection. People were going to OneNote, people were going to Bear, people were going to insert note-taking app here. It was a really challenging time for Evernote, and a new CEO joined then. His name's Ian Small, and he seems to have done a good job righting the ship. I mean, it's not just him, obviously, but the company seems to be getting back on a good footing. They've released some features that are actually useful and you might actually want to use, instead of kind of like losing focus like before, like releasing socks and the work chat feature that is much derided. And they did something which is pretty controversial, I would say, which is they rewrote the app from the ground up. There was a lot of technical debt. There was a lot of old infrastructure that needed to be improved before they could start moving forward. And so actually is a really difficult decision to do that, because it can be really disruptive. And it did actually make people quite upset, especially power users, at some of the features that were lost. But it seems to be paying off and things seem to be like moving in the right direction. So what I thought we would do is, maybe before we get into the new features, I did find that CEO letter this year quite interesting. So I just thought I'd share some highlights from that. And one of them I noticed right away, especially a longtime Evernote user will know that Evernote's tagline, their mission statement, has always been remember everything. That was always their goal. Like whatever you needed to remember could go in Evernote, whether that's home stuff, work stuff, whatever. But now their mission statement is remember everything and accomplish anything. And that's like a minor wording, but it's a very interesting reframe, because it shows that what they're trying to do is not just have Evernote be a dumping ground for your thoughts, your memories, your information, but want to make it actually useful, something you can use day to day to help you get stuff done.
I think it's a good idea because there's this overall movement that some people call super apps. And it's just the idea that one, when we first used the iPhone or the smartphone, we were eager to install like 20, 40 different apps and kind of use different apps for different things. But if you look at your own behavior on a day-to-day basis, you probably use anywhere between 5 to 7 apps religiously. And this is something that's very common in parts of Asia, where most people, they just use 1 or 2 apps for everything. And so they call this like a super app. And I think Evernote is kind of like recognizing that as well, where it's trying to do a lot of like things, like productivity things, if you may call them, in one app. So instead of just remembering everything now, where it's just storing notes, how can we help and serve our clients even more? And that is by helping them accomplish things, getting stuff done, right? So it's like people have always been trying to use Evernote as a task manager, and I was personally never a big fan of that, because I think a lot of task managers or to-do list apps are very powerful on their own. But with some of the newest features and the things that they're trying to accomplish, especially with this new tagline, I can see how if they do a good job of like making tasks really awesome, then you could make a good case to say, hey, you just need one app, use Evernote to get everything done that you need to get done and remember stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that about wanting to be like kind of like a super app. And for quite a while, Evernote, especially once they had raised a bunch of money and they had to start like showing returns to their investors, I think, because I think the goal was always to go public, and it never really happened. But it's like they tried to do this before, but they almost attacked it the wrong way. I mentioned work chat before, but they wanted to make Evernote a place where people could collaborate and communicate. But the problem is people already have a way to communicate in their organization. It's very difficult to take people off the thing that they are already using and make them use something else. A better thing is to solve problems that people have, which is information's all over the place. They don't have like a centralized place to like work from. And then they can still use their other tools to communicate, but now Evernote can hopefully, or potentially anyway, be that tool, or at least that's what they're hoping. Another thing that the CEO's letter mentioned is that they're done a lot of focusing on stabilization and performance. Like this is one knock I've had about Evernote the last couple of years, is I found anyway, it just became really slow, really unwieldy. If you want to capture something, you want it to be fast. And Evernote definitely was not that for a while. So they've really done a lot of work trying to improve that. So I think they've done, there's always more to do, but I think they've done a pretty decent job. All right.
What are some other things that you want to highlight here?
All right, so let's get into some of the new features of Evernote that is released. Maybe, if you're somebody who lives and breathes in Evernote, you've maybe seen some of these, but maybe not. If you're not somebody who follows this stuff regularly. So we thought we would highlight some of the kind of like big features that we see that could help make Evernote one of these super apps. And what we're going to do, this is an audio podcast, so we'll be describing some of this stuff. But what we'll do is in the show notes, we'll include a link to a small little resource on Evernote's website where they kind of introduce and explain this feature we're going to talk about. And the first feature we thought we would talk about, kind of like the most obvious place to start, is something called the home area. And this is the thing that makes Evernote becoming a super app, an all-in-one app, possible, because what it does is it lets you create a dashboard with all of your recent notes, a scratch pad where you can quickly capture stuff. You can pin important notes. It'll show your recent captures. So like maybe receipts you've recently scanned and stuff like that, and some more widgets, which we'll get into later. But I think it's a great way to bring things together, because traditionally when you've started Evernote, at least on the desktop, you've just started with your most recent notes or your notes, and people have kind of tried to make a dashboard with like pin notes and notes that link to other places, which is good. But Evernote's really made this I think a really nice looking and really functional way to do it. What do you think, Tan? Have you used the home area? What do you think about it?
I'm a big fan of it, and I wouldn't say I use something like the scratch pad because you could kind of use an Evernote note to capture whatever comes to mind. But I can see it being helpful as well, especially for things that maybe have a longevity of like 10 minutes or something. So let's say, for example, you're on the phone and someone says, hey, instead of me handling this, actually, you should call this phone number. And then you go, okay, let me write this down. And typically I would write that in MV Alt, because a lot of my notes are in MV Alt that have like a kind of like short shelf life. But now you could use something like a scratch pad in Evernote to accomplish the same thing essentially. So I can see that being very helpful for notes that have a very short lifespan. So that's something that I personally don't use, but I can see a lot of people benefiting from. But the reason I like it is, typically before this feature, I would use, like you mentioned, pinned notes or starred notes, as people call them, or favorites. And then you have them on the left sidebar, at least on the desktop here on the Mac. And then that would kind of like be your starting ground for where you want to go and navigate as you open up Evernote. But now with the home feature, you can kind of like have a 2-for-1. You can still have your favorite notes on the left, but then on the home screen or home area, you can now have a lot more like your favorite notes or your recent notes or other things on there that make it a little bit more holistic in terms of how you want to use the app, and kind of have an overview of what's in Evernote as well. So I find it very helpful, and I think it's a really nice addition. I wish they did this earlier, but I can't complain.
Yeah, another feature that's related to the home area, because it's a type of widget on the home area, because like I said, you can add different widgets. And one of them, which is, at least at time of recording, is relatively new, is something called a filtered widget. So even if you use the home area before, it's worth checking this out if you haven't used it before. But basically what this lets you do is create a widget on your home area with custom views of your notes as widgets on your home screen. And the plan that you're in limits kind of how many of these you can create. But basically what it lets you do is create these custom views on your home screen. So you could have, say, a widget with your taxable receipts. You could have meeting notes for a certain project, or all your notes or links to your notes for a certain project. You can do it by tag. You can, however you want to slice and dice this information, it allows you to have it really quick access on your home area. And I think it's a really great solution for doing that, because like we said, it wants your home area to be your dashboard, and this lets you really customize the information that you want. So it's not something I've used a lot so far, but I really like the concept of it, really customizable. The next new feature that we want to talk about is the calendar. So there's been long people talking about wanting to find some way to integrate Evernote with the calendar. And the thing that I like about how Evernote did this is they didn't kind of succumb to the temptation that they would have succumbed to maybe 5 years ago or something like that, which is they didn't try to create their own calendar that they hope people will replace their existing calendar with. They knew, like we were saying, that people aren't going to go off, especially if they're doing it for work, people aren't going to go off their Google Calendar, people aren't going to go off their Microsoft 365 calendar. So instead of trying to get people to move to the Evernote calendar, they're saying, no, we're going to integrate it with your existing calendars. So now, right now, it only integrates with Google calendars, but the CEO's letter has said that Microsoft 365 is their next project to get that integrated as well. But what it allows you to do, which I think is really cool, is you can create a note based on a calendar entry, and the title of the note comes from the calendar entry. Of course, you can change it later. And at the top of the note is information from that meeting. And you can kind of go vice versa. You can create calendar entries from Evernote, or you can create notes from calendar entries. And then everything's kind of associated together. And again, you can have this on a widget on your home area. And I really like their approach of how they worked with the calendar. What do you think of that, Tan?
Yeah, I remember when I first enabled it, I wasn't sure what to think of it until I started getting these notifications where it says, hey, you're about to have a meeting with so-and-so. Do you want to create an Evernote of this meeting? And I said, yes, actually, I do. So it's really helpful in the sense that I have, for example, I have a lot of Zoom meetings with people, whether it's internally or people outside the company. And so to give you an example, I have a meeting every Monday with my executive assistant. And so before the meeting starts, I'll get a notification from Evernote saying, hey, would you like to create a meeting note for this meeting? And I create yes, or click yes, or say create notes. And this is just a notification that pops up, right? So you want to make sure you have your notifications turned on, at least on the desktop, to be able to allow this to happen. And so when you do press that, what ends up happening is that Evernote will then pull the information from the calendar events and kind of like summarize all the stuff that's in there in the note as well. So we'll show you like, you know, the name of the meeting as the or the meeting name is then the note name in Evernote. And so it will also pull in the participants of the calendar events into the meeting note as well, or your Evernote, I should say. And so we'll say like the date and time, who was on the meeting, is it a Zoom call, all the URLs that are in the description. And then it will create another section called action items. So you can quickly create tasks in Evernote with that feature as well, which is like a kind of a new thing, which we'll talk about next. And then also it will have another section just called notes. So you can kind of quickly write in bullets what you just mentioned and talked about. And I think for a lot of people, the initial friction of creating meeting notes for your meetings is oftentimes the biggest barrier to entry to taking meeting notes. It's kind of like formatting the stuff, you know, writing down who's on the meeting, like the date and time. And you can eliminate a lot of that friction when you have text expander snippets. And that's something I use for a lot of my meetings. I use text expander to kind of like make it really easy for myself. But with Evernote, because it can automatically do all that stuff for you, it makes it so easy to create meeting notes whenever you have stuff on the calendar. And if I have one feature request, I would say that there's a lot of stuff on my calendar, such as like, oh, pick up a package or something like that, right? And that is not like a notification that I need to have a meeting note for. But Evernote is not kind of like smart enough to kind of recognize that. So I wonder if there's a way to kind of train Evernote to say, hey, this is the type of meeting I want to get a notification for and automatically do that. And for others, don't, or at least ask me fewer times. So that's like one feature request I might have, but otherwise I'm actually very happy with this feature.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned tasks because that is exactly the next thing we wanted to talk about. And this is something we hear a lot from people, TPS listeners, our customers, that sort of thing. People are like, I really don't like how my stuff is all over the place. You know, I've got tasks here, I've got documents here, I've got information here, all these different systems, and they want to kind of like simplify things. And Evernote has had kind of a, I would personally say, not great like task checkbox system for years and years and years. And the way people would use it, and I'm sure we'll hear from lots of listeners saying that, hey, I've used Evernote as my to-do list for years and it works well for me. If it works well for you, that's great. But I personally don't think it's the greatest, the way they've always had their checkbox system. But, you know, they could only work with what they had. But now they've created a whole task system, like you mentioned, that integrates with your Evernote notes. So you can see your tasks in the tasks tab of the Evernote app. You can go to a note and see the tasks that are associated with it. So like you said, you can have action items with a note, and you can add a widget to your home area, going back to the home area again and bringing everything together in this kind of like super app where you can see your tasks. So you can see right on your home area, along with all your other kind of like command center dashboard, you can see the tasks that you need to do. I can see a lot of people, maybe if they don't have like super complex, if they don't have super complex task needs, I can see a lot of people actually starting to use this if they're already in the Evernote ecosystem. How about you, Tan? It sounds like you're pretty all in with using the calendar system in Evernote. Could you ever see yourself moving to Evernote for your task manager, or do you think it's not quite ready there for you?
I would say if you're listening to this and you consider yourself a power user of any task management app, I would say the Evernote feature is probably not good enough for you. So that's the category I would put myself in. And I would say, well, I probably wouldn't use it for like my most urgent stuff or project management stuff that I have going on in my personal life. However, I also know that I'm typically the exception. So most people would actually benefit from this task feature, I would say, especially if you like to keep things very simple. I would say because it is kind of like integrated and kind of creates like almost like a dashboard for all your tasks that are all over the place and different notes. It makes it really easy for you to find all the things you have to do. So in that sense, it's really easy. You just have to be a little bit more maybe like trained up in terms of like filtering and sorting stuff in Evernote in itself, which is actually pretty easy. But if you're willing to do that, then it's actually a relatively robust task management system. And the cool thing about it then is because it all intertwines with your notes, uh, by having all your notes and tasks in one place, you oftentimes remove a lot of friction, right? So for example, when I use OmniFocus, oftentimes I'll link to specific Evernote notes by using like the linking feature. So then it opens up the app and such. But it'd be nice to have it all in one place. And I think Evernote for most people will be sufficient. But if you're a power user of any particular to-do list app, you probably like to have certain, views and filters and so on. And I think Evernote is not really good enough right now, at least.
Yeah, I guess if you're somebody who like uses OmniFocus and relies on different perspectives and stuff like that, probably Evernote tasks are not going to be for you. But if you do kind of like err towards the simple side of things and you like that idea of having things together, I think of it kind of like one of the power things of Outlook and Microsoft To Do is this, like you said, this link between them that you can create a to do from an email and you can go back to the email and Outlook from your to do. Evernote's kind of the same. If you're somebody who works with a lot of notes, creates notes, then there's this, it's very tempting to have this link between notes and tasks. So yeah, it's not quite there for the power users, like you say, but it's a really great start. And I'm really happy that they implemented it. All right, so the last few new features we want to talk about are pretty minor things, but just wanted to mention them. Number one, I always like it when you use an app and you use a feature and you can tell that the developers use that app as well. And this next feature I want to talk about is called Customize the Create button on mobile. It's kind of a mouthful, but what that means is, say you're in the mobile Evernote app and you hit the button to create a new item, whatever it is. And the good and the bad thing about Evernote is you can do a lot, right? You can scan a document, you can create a new note, you can create a new task, you can do a calendar entry, you can take a picture. Like there's a bunch of different things that you can do when you create a new note. The problem is a lot of us don't use all of those things. So what they've done is they've added a feature that lets you customize what appears when you hit that create button. So if you're somebody who only ever creates notes, you can turn off all the other stuff you don't need. If you're somebody who does very often scan receipts and stuff like that, you can leave that there. And so it really lets you customize the thing. And I can tell that that's a feature that probably came from, the developers themselves or the product managers anyway, being regular Evernote users and realizing that space is such a premium on mobile that you want to make it as easy as possible for people to capture this stuff. So I really like that feature. Kind of a minor thing, but I appreciate it for sure. And the final one I want to mention is apparently they are going to be launching a Linux client. And you might be thinking to yourself, why are you mentioning a Linux client? Like, what's the big deal? You would, like we said, I've been using Evernote for a very long time, been in the forums, had people emailing me questions about Evernote and stuff like that. And you would be surprised how often over the years we get asked about, hey, is there any way that Evernote can run on Linux? So I'm not personally a Linux guy, although I used to be, but there is a demand for that out there. So it's great to see them doing that as well. So yeah, Linux client coming for those who have been asking us. All right, so let's wrap it up. So I don't know about you, Tam, but I've seen this trend lately of people. I don't know if they're joking or not. I don't think so, but I saw this tweet the other day that said, and I wish I captured who it was from, so apologize. But basically it said, after messing around with Notion and Obsidian for the past few months and years, I'm very tempted to just go back to Evernote for everything. And, I don't know if they will actually do this, but I have been seeing this trend of people on this sentiment being a little bit more pro Evernote than I've seen in quite some time. Now, you and I never stopped using it, like we said, but I wonder if there's going to be a lot of people taking a second look after a lot of the stabilizations and new features they have coming. So I'm just really fascinated to see where Evernote goes over the next few years. What are your kind of final Evernote thoughts, Tam?
I was very surprised by that CEO statement that they had their best year ever in terms of annual revenue. And when you just casually observe online the forums, even the tickets that we get from people, we have a private community in the Productivity Academy where people talking about notes apps as well. You see a lot of mentions of Notion, Obsidian, and all these other different apps, OneNotes. And so it makes you think, oh wow, maybe Evernote is kind of struggling here. But then you hear this other statement and you go, oh wow, like I guess last year was a really good year for them. And it's hard to say like where they're going to be over the next few years. However, one thing I've always been a big proponent of is I'm always the guy who is going to go for the tried and true. And so if I'm staying at a place somewhere in a new city, I'm going to stay at a place that has, great reviews and has been around for a while instead of something that's brand new and has no track record whatsoever. And I feel like Evernote is kind of like that. It's been around for, over a decade. It's financially stable, it seems. You're not going to, lose your notes one day. And what I'm hoping is going to stay true is that they will continue to listen to their customers so that they're only building features that really are highly requested and demanded, not that it turns into like bloatware, because I think that's always the thing that is really easy to get into. And so the fact that they rewrote it from scratch and rebuilt it from the bottom up seems very promising. And I'm really liking the features that I'm seeing, and I'm starting to use Evernote more often now. And I'm actually on the verge of maybe replacing some and ancillary apps around it, such as like NVAlt, and just merge it into Evernote itself. So I'm very, very keen on it. So I'm excited to see where they're going to be in about a year from now. To wrap up today's episode, just want to remind people that next week we have our favorite wellness apps. So be sure to tune in next week as well. And everything that we mentioned in the show notes can be found at theproductivityshow.com/392. Thanks again for joining us here today, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.